Good afternoon and welcome to Beyond the Bruises, a discussion about domestic violence. I'm Catherine Nero, and I normally do Facebook Lives for the Inquirer in the morning on Coffee Break with Catherine, but I'm excited to be part of this discussion today, and it all centers around a three-part series that the Inquirer has put together over the last several weeks about domestic violence in our area, and it's called Beyond the Bruises. And today we're going to be joined by several experts to talk about what this is all about. But first and foremost, let's talk with one of the reporters behind Beyond the Bruises. So right now, Terry DeMio is joining us, and we're going to be talking about that. Terry, thanks so much for joining me today.
I'm so happy to be here, Catherine. Thank you.
Terry, for those folks who haven't seen the three-part series, haven't read it, tell us about the process by which you and your colleagues Ann Saker and Cameron Knight put together this really extensively researched series of pieces.
Absolutely. So Cam and Ann and I are all from the same Inquirer team of reporters, and Liz Dufour is a photojournalist with the Inquirer who often steps in on our stories. What happened was the three of us as reporters had been talking about domestic violence as an issue to cover. Liz had some of her own contacts, and we had all seen what everybody sees, that police incidents are made, incident reports are made, and then somehow the cases just sort of disappear. We all seem to know somebody who at least at some point had knowledge of or was maybe a survivor. And we know that children are impacted. And so we decided, let's do this kind of deep dive and focus largely, as Cam suggested, on children and growing up with this and what it does and how we can address this to make people more aware of the situation.
And that segues nicely into our two experts who will be joining us today. So speaking of children in particular, also joined right now by Dr. Robert Shapiro from Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center, as well as by Lori Droege, who is from the Ion Center for Prevention and Violence Prevention in Covington. So I appreciate each of you being here today.
Thanks for having us.
All right, let's start with you, Dr. Shapiro, and let's talk specifically about an acronym that we saw a lot in the series Behind the Bruises, and that is Adverse Childhood Experiences, ACEs. Explain what those are and how they impact a child's development.
Well, thanks for asking, Catherine. ACEs, or Adverse Childhood Experiences, are what happened to kids during the first 18 years of their lives that cause the body's stress response to become elevated. And what we now know through many years of research is that too much stress, when kids' stress levels are elevated too high, too often, for too long, it actually changes the biology of the child's brain, the child's DNA, and the child's immune systems. And so we now know that if we want our children to grow up healthy, not only physically healthy, but also with good mental health, we need to pay attention to these experiences and how often kids are exposed to ACEs.
And so that begins with preventing that domestic violence from happening in the first place. And Lori, that's what the Ion Center in Covington really does. Explain how you guys go about that process and the importance of education to prevent domestic violence in the first place.
Yes, so thank you for asking or for giving us this opportunity. So at the Ion Center for Violence Prevention, we focus on, our mission is we want to take the best care possible of people who have been impacted by power-based personal violence. And when we say power-based personal violence, what that means is any kind of violence in which somebody uses their power to hurt somebody else. So partner violence and sexual violence are the two kinds of violence that we specifically focus on, but that also would include elder abuse, child abuse, and other kinds of violence as well. So we want to take the best care possible of people who have been impacted by that violence, as well as we want to measurably reduce the number of people who have experienced that kind of violence. So it sounds kind of cliche and head in the clouds, but like we do ultimately want to work ourselves out of a job. We do not want to have to take care of people after they've been hurt anymore. And so how we go about doing that is we focus on the 3 levels of prevention. So we have primary, secondary, and tertiary. And so my team focuses on the primary prevention, which means preventing something before it happens. The way that we go about doing that right now is we are actually in middle schools and high schools, training those students on how to actively intervene in situations that they see sexual violence or dating violence or even bullying might be happening. So we train them to safely and effectively intervene in those situations. And we also go beyond schools, and we are in colleges as well as in the adult community as well to deliver those messages and provide that training.
And Terry, that's a lot of what you reported on on the Bruises. So tell me about the takeaways. You were in these classrooms when some of this prevention discussion was happening.
Well, what happens is you've got children, and just as a child is quite literal, we all know our kids are quite literal. They don't necessarily recognize cues, and they don't know what is normal or abnormal, difficult situations, healthy or unhealthy, until they experience it, and sometimes, in many cases, are actually told. So, these experts go into our schools. Some of the health teachers within our schools do their own work, and they really let kids know, this is what it looks like. This is what this emotional thing, from anywhere from joking to, a little push, any of these things might be red flags that this is not a good situation that's going on. And one of the things that was, one of the kids I quoted was a teenager who had been through a Women Helping Women course on healthy relationships. And what he said was, wow, my parents always fight. I didn't know that there could be anything else. Now I know there's a healthy, I didn't know what a healthy relationship was, and we had that kind of understanding going on from younger levels all the way to the big kids.
And Dr. Shapiro, I know, this is anytime you talk about an invisible situation, whether it's a developmental delay or a disorder that isn't obvious to the naked eye, a lot of people question it. When we're talking about adverse childhood experiences, what is this like in trying to treat that as a medical professional and to get people, not just in families, but in the government and whomever else, to understand the importance of that?
Well, Catherine, there isn't any way for us to see the effect of adverse childhood experiences by doing an examination. We can inquire, we can survey, we can discuss the importance of minimizing the impact of negative experiences on a child, but we don't yet have a way to measure which children and how much children are affected by ACEs. But there's a lot of good news to also share with you. We know that positive experiences in a child's life can help to counterbalance those negative experiences. And we know that we have very definite ways of helping children deal with the stress that occurs from ACEs so that these negative biologic changes don't occur. So for instance, having a constant, a reliable adult relationship, someone who will support the child in navigating life's challenges, navigating these stressful experiences, helping to keep the child safe. These things can really help to reduce the impact of ACEs, and that is our goal. And so it makes common sense, doesn't it, to reduce and prevent child abuse and neglect, exposure to domestic violence, things that cause children to feel a lot of stress. But we often can't do that. And many children experience abuse and neglect and are exposed to other violence in the home, but they don't tell anyone, just like we were just talking about. And so we need to become aware that ACEs and adversity is a part of the lives so many children have, and we need to change and encourage our community, our schools, our legislation to support those kids with positive experiences and ways to help build resilience.
For many years, I served on the board of the Family Nurturing Center, which is childhood abuse prevention. And the running joke that I always tell people is, well, no one's pro-child abuse. Everybody is anti-child abuse. But Lori, you've actually, some of these programs do have a bit of a controversy. Some parents are a little concerned about introducing this prevention tactic or discussion anyway, especially among younger people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what we've experienced, and fortunately in the programs that we're doing in Northern Kentucky, in middle school, we do a program called It's My Space, where people explore their boundaries, and you get to talk about different boundaries and different relationships and different scenarios, and you start to really figure out like what things feel okay for you, what things do not feel okay for you. And with Green Dot, we talk specifically about how to intervene as bystanders. And so in our programming, what I've heard from our colleagues across the state of Kentucky is with that middle school program in particular, there is some parental concern around it. And I think it's because parents have different comfort levels with the different topics of conversation. When we're talking about things like how to prevent dating violence and sexual assault, we are going to be talking about things like consent, and we are going to be talking about things like sex. Not that we're telling anyone what they should or shouldn't do, but I do think that there are different comfort levels. And so there have been some parents expressing concerns around those. Fortunately, our program hasn't had those interactions. I'm not saying that they won't happen anytime in the future, but our experience with parents has actually been really as allies. This is how we approach our students themselves when we work with schools. Like when we are approaching people as bystanders, we are saying, you have something to contribute. You are part of the solution. Here are some skills for you to do that. And our experience with parents has largely been the same. When high school students talk to their friends who go to different schools that don't have Green Dot or that we're not in, frequently those students will tell their parents, and they're like, how do we get this in our school? And so we've actually had a fair amount of parents, hey, you don't have this kind of education in my kid's school, and this is something that's really important to us. We had a recent school where a student came to us and they were like, I feel very passionately about this. I just don't understand where, I think she said they're a blue ribbon school. So we have all of these, like everybody's all about the sports, everybody's all about the academics, but my peers don't know when they might be in an abusive relationship or what to do. And I think that this is just as important as any of those other things. And that student, with the support of her parent, it felt like almost single-handedly like campaigned to get us. Like she rallied, and there was so much support, and we are now in that school because of it. And so like I really love that we have been able to approach people as allies in this. How do we keep people safe? Because you're right, nobody is pro-violence.
Yeah. And you mentioned allyship, and Terry and Lori, we were talking about this before. There's an incredible story about a girl driving through London, Kentucky just recently who made a specific hand gesture. And it's a hand gesture that not a lot of people knew about. That is a hand gesture that says, hey, I'm in trouble, I need help. And so let's talk about that and show the gesture as well. So it's this, right? So it's an open hand, thumb in, and she was just doing this.
Yeah, that's what it was. And before this weekend, I was not familiar with that hand gesture. It kind of blew up on Monday for us as well. And it's just such an amazing story of the power of the bystander. Mm-hmm. Like we have such power to impact other people's lives. And like, it's such a small thing, right? Like it feels like such a small thing.
And the key is to the potential abuser.
It
Might
means
not be
nothing.
a thing. Exactly.
Yes. And we see like similar, we have different, I've heard of similar tactics, right? So like, especially in the work that we do with bars, and that I know Women Helping Women does with bars, and many other agencies across the country working with bars, frequently there is a name or a drink that you can ask for
The angel
at the
shot.
bar.
Yes.
Yeah, the angel shot. Or sometimes it's like, is Angelique working,
Right.
or what, like is Karen working, or whatever random name that they've decided on. And then that is a signal to that bartender or that staff person, hey, this person needs help. Because frequently when we're in a situation where we need help, we can't really provide that help to ourselves. Like sometimes sometimes it's not up to us whether or not we can stop the violence. Sometimes we need help from the bystanders around us.
Dr. Shapiro, I know, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Terry.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to say that the impact of social media on this was huge. And I think too, people should realize that, there are these simple things that you can do that can really assist people. It just shows you how the community at large is impacted, and not just the individuals who are involved, very closely with a family or one situation. Thanks.
Oh, thank you. And, it really goes to show as well. I know that the month in particular, Terry, that you guys took to really assess this great database of, or multiple databases of, who did what to whom and for how long, and how generational this abuse was just at the beginning of the pandemic. But Dr. Shapiro, we've seen the numbers since the pandemic began. 62% has the killings have increased 62%, domestic violence killings in Ohio since the beginning of the pandemic. I'm curious, what are you seeing in regards to children, as far as like they weren't in school, where teachers weren't maybe able to either see signs of abuse or teach signs of abuse?
Yeah, Catherine, this is something that we all worry about. We worry about it here at Children's Hospital and the Mayerson Center. My colleagues around the country all worry about it. The silent epidemic, the silent harm that we fear is happening because children are no longer out in public. So many of reports of abuse and neglect are generated by teachers and other paraprofessionals or neighbors who see kids. And during the pandemic, of course, that has not been happening as frequently. So we worry a lot. I think, Catherine, we won't really know what these figures are until sometime, many years later, when we're able to look retrospectively. But the protective powers of community, of teachers, can't be underestimated. And we can all do our part. Just like the story, which is so dramatic, of that girl doing the hand signal in the car window, we can all do our part to help kids, to identify those kids who seem to be at risk, and at the same time helping parents and parenting. Parenting is a tough job, and the pandemic for most parents has only made it more difficult. Where there's difficulty, where there's additional stress, we see more abuse and neglect as well. So helping parents as a community manage life with a young family is something that we all can do better at.
And Terry, I know, speaking of family, one of the kind of biggest tenets that came out of this reporting was the fact that so often domestic violence is generational, and that 25%, according to the numbers that you guys studied, 25% had some sort of close relative that had to deal with domestic violence. Tell me about that side of the reporting and how those numbers played out and what you learned from them.
Okay, yeah, we were fortunate to have a grant from USC that helped us fund the work of Quinlan Bentley, who did a lot of deep dive database searching. And one of the things that he found, we took Hamilton County because it's our major, area of concern. And one of the things that we found, that among both alleged perpetrators and survivors or those who didn't survive a domestic violence incident, 1 in 4 of these cases had had a history of domestic violence. Now, I think that while that is a stunning and sobering number, there have been people for years who have known of this. I think what's new is the fact that this can be changed. This can be improved by the things that Dr. Shapiro says. And I want to mention that all of these prevention experts that we spoke with, I was fortunate to be able to check on every one of the programs used, including some of the programs used by the health teachers themselves. These are evidence-based initiatives. That's not just going in and saying, say no to drugs or say no to violence. These are programs that have been tested and show the help, the improvement that can be made. So yeah, looking at some of those lives, we weren't able to give the public the full view, and we will continue to report on this issue. But Ann Saker, our health reporter, and Liz Dufour, our photojournalist in particular, spoke with numerous people, including, a 16-year-old survivor, numerous people about their experiences that might become a part of another story down the road. We don't expect this to be here, we've done it.
Right.
Yeah.
Terry, I'm so glad you brought that up. 25% is a huge number. And one of the things that many of us have never really quite grappled with is just how common trauma is. Mm-hmm. Trauma is really common experience for so many people growing up today in all parts of the world and all parts of our country. And you really hit the nail on the head when you said that we now can do something about it because we understand the effects of trauma much better than we ever did before, including ways to counter those effects. That's what we should be doing as a community. That's what we should be doing as providers. That's what we should be doing as parents, recognizing that trauma is harmful, but we can do something about it.
Speaking of which, Dr. Shapiro, let's talk a little bit about, like, when we think of adverse childhood experiences, I think, especially in this discussion, we're thinking about domestic violence, child abuse, that sort of thing. But it goes beyond that. It goes beyond, and in fact, many of us may have these ACEs without even realizing it.
Well, absolutely. In fact, we have a lot of protective mechanisms that we may not remember some of the traumas, or we may have concluded that we've dealt with our trauma pretty well. But in fact, it's hard to know how true that is. So trauma comes in many different forms. When we talk about specifically adverse childhood experiences, we talk about those traumas that cause kids to feel like they are in danger. Mm-hmm. Elevated heart rates, elevated blood pressure. These are things that happen when our stress hormones, adrenaline and cortisol, become elevated. And our bodies are remarkable at adapting to change, and that's exactly what happens. When we're exposed as children to stress too powerful, too strong, too often, our bodies change to adapt to that, to compensate. But the price that we pay to compensate and to adapt is high, and it's tragic. Kids have difficulty learning. Kids have difficulty interacting in a social, emotionally a way that helps to promote community, helps to promote learning, helps to promote working with others. And so we adapt, but this particular adaptation helps with survival, but it doesn't help with growing into a healthy adult and being a healthy child.
And so obviously one of the answers to that is prevention. And Lori, Terry mentioned the evidence that really hammers home this isn't just a theory. Let's talk about that. Can you tell us about some of the evidence behind the prevention measures?
Yeah, so depending on the programs that people do, everything that I read about in the article itself. So most of the work that's being done by the providers in Greater Cincinnati is evidence-based, which is super, super exciting. When I started in this field over 10 years ago, one of the things that was really common was like these one-time assembly style, hey, if this happens to you, here's a number, like maybe a couple of red flags. And the evidence just doesn't support that those things do anything to change any kind of behavior. And so most of the work being done today is evidence-based in that the evaluations that have been done around it are either randomized controlled trials or that they're like meta-analyses of several different studies showing that it's effectively reducing victimization or effectively reducing perpetration. So the program that we do, Green Dot, there was a randomized controlled trial across the state of Kentucky from 2009 to 2014. And what they found is that in schools with Green Dot, there was a 17 to 21% reduction in the perpetration of sexual violence, dating violence, and stalking, which is pretty phenomenal. And when you look at the evidence base for similar programs like what Women Helping Women are, oh my gosh, why can't I say this? Women Helping Women are doing, or the programs that you mentioned, like Safe Dates, there are also similar numbers. There's a really, really great document if anyone wants to learn more about the evidence base of what's happening right now. And it is published by the CDC, and it's called, it's just Stop SV, a technical package to prevent sexual violence. I do know that we're talking a lot about partner violence right now, but nothing's really cool about sexual violence and partner violence, but what is cool about preventing them is that a lot of times they overlap, their risk factors and their protective factors overlap. And so usually when you're addressing one, you are also helping to address another and to reduce another, which is exciting. So there are lots of overlapping programs in that document.
And Dr. Shapiro and Lori, this is for either one of you. Really what it sounds like is that education piece. Like it makes sense that if kids don't know what to look for, they don't know what to look for. They don't know where they are in the continuum, perhaps. And so where do we go from here for either one of you?
You know, we don't want to put responsibility on the kids for recognizing this. This is not what childhood is, but we need to help give kids the tools to feel safe, to be safe, and to develop the skills that they need. Those are executive functioning skills as well as social emotional skills. And we can do this. It's not easy. It requires, as you said, education. It also requires that we help schools and communities implement changes to do this.
And Lori, did you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I would love to. So one of the things that's really interesting with what we do, we tend to work more with high school students, and middle schoolers is a smaller program for us. And whenever we go into a school for a training, we are always very, very clear, like this is a way for you all to protect and intervene in what's happening amongst your peers. This is not anything that you are to go home and to try and be an active bystander with what's going on in your own home environment. And so Dr. Shapiro, when you said like, this isn't a child's responsibility to prevent child abuse. So we are wholly in agreement there. And that's in super alignment with what we're teaching. And I think that's really important for us to underscore. But when we're talking about prevention in high schools and like preventing peer-based work, like it's not all stuff that like as adults, we have limited power. And we are all about centering and empowering youth in the work that we do. And I know that this is true for our sister programs in Cincinnati, in the greater Cincinnati area, is that like, how do they do something to prevent what's happening around them? And we do similar things with like we said, education, recognizing when it's happening around you. The things that we do are, in addition to that, are like, how do you practice techniques? So we go over like very tangible skills. I think a lot of people think like intervening in a situation it has to be a big scene. Like it has to be like,
Right.
stop that, that's not okay, or like, that's not cool. And that's just not the case. Like, so we love to get into like, okay, so what does it look like to directly intervene? Maybe you are the person who can be like, that's not what we do here, or that's not okay, or you just give a look. Or maybe if that feels uncomfortable for you, you can check in with the target. Hey, I noticed that this thing happened. I noticed that this is how this person was treating you, and that didn't seem okay to me. Or are you okay? Do you need help? Or getting somebody else to do something about it. And then the last one that we talk about is making distractions, which high school students love because it's it's also my favorite. We call them the 3Ds: direct, delegate, distract. And it's just like, because you don't have to draw attention to that situation. You don't have to be like, hey, I see what's happening here and I'm not okay with it. It can be as simple as if you see a situation at a party and maybe a couple is escalating, their fight is escalating, and you're worried that it's going to turn physical, you, I don't know, say, hey, pizza's here, or
Trip
oh,
on
the
the banana
cops are
peel,
coming.
whatever.
Right.
You can do, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Spill your drink, whatever that is. And students love that because they're like, oh, I thought I had to risk my friendships. I thought I had to risk like my social life in order to do this thing. And that's not the case. Like, it doesn't have to be a big scene. And I absolutely love that. So like teaching them realistic skills that this is how you can actually impact somebody's life around you. It's super exciting.
And Terry, you had something to mention as well?
And I'm sorry, Catherine, I've got to run. I've got another meeting to join. So
Dr. Shapiro, you're very important. We understand, and we thank you for being
but
here.
I wish I could stay on longer.
Well,
Thank
we
you so
appreciate it
much.
very much. Thank you, Dr. Shapiro.
So
Bye.
appreciate it. Bye-bye.
All right. And Terry, you wanted to mention something.
Yeah, we did include in my story that social emotional learning, and that many of our kids, at least in Kentucky and Ohio, which is our region here, are getting in the elementary age and even below. And Beach Acres Parenting Center has something called the character effect. And basically, you show kids how to be kind of proud of themselves and who they are and what's strong about them, and teach them also to recognize these traits in a classmate. And it might be a classmate who's really quiet, but this child over here recognizes that this little boy or girl is, I don't know, has a characteristic that's, this way or that way. And they go through these positive character traits that help, in a sense, they teach understanding each other, they teach some empathy, and they build confidence and self-esteem, which is that's a huge part of staying safe and healthy, right, Lori? That's just part of
For sure. For sure. I love it when we go into schools and we hear that they have social emotional learning programs already in place, because it feels like those students do have like a much better grasp on empathy and conflict resolution and different things like that. In our middle school program, those are also the things that we're trying to establish. Like, we're not talking about, I mentioned before the middle school program, I was like, sometimes we have to talk about sexual behaviors, but it's like, we're not talking about like how to do those things. We're talking about like whether that's kissing, flirting, or even friendship behaviors. Like, we're helping students to identify what are they okay with and what are they not okay with. And that social emotional learning helps them to also assert those boundaries once they've identified them. It's okay to have boundaries. It's okay that things aren't okay with you. And what's okay with you is going to be different than what's okay with the person sitting next to you in class. And we have to be aware of those differences. And how do we engage when everybody has these different experiences, different backgrounds, different preferences. And I think social emotional learning helps with that.
As we wrap up here today, Terry, I want to ask you, what was your biggest takeaway in this recording?
That is really hard for me to say, but I think that, we have work to do. We have a caring community. We have experts, we have specialists, we have a lot going on. But the Justice Center is not the place to begin the turnaround with domestic violence. And I think that the individuals we spoke with, the Cincinnati Police Department, and their connection with Women Helping Women for the Divert program, the children, the college student I spoke with, and of course, Lori and other experts, and Dr. Shapiro, this isn't something that is a criminal justice issue. This is a human issue. This is a health issue.
Mm-hmm. And so, Lori, I would imagine then that means prevention is the answer in many cases. So what's next as we look at prevention?
Yes. And yes, as a public health person, I would definitely agree this is a health issue and prevention is the answer, right? So I would say the next step is it's kind of twofold for us. Our slogan is no one has to do everything, but everyone can do something. So you all spoke to community partnerships before. So we do a lot of partnering in my team with schools. In our agency, we partner with the police. We partner with mental health service providers, addiction recovery services. We partner with so many different agencies. And I think it's like recognition that we all have a role to play. That has to come first. Like, this is not just, these issues are not going to go away if we're not all actively working on them, if we don't all do just like even a couple of things to help keep our community safer. And I think more tangibly, I guess I would say just like more education in schools, more evidence-based prevention programming in schools. So going wider. I believe in the article, it was Women Helping Women that said that they were in 24 schools, I think. We're in about 15 schools. That's not all of the schools in the area, right? Mm-hmm. And so ideally getting in as many schools as possible, but that requires funding because you have educator capacity. And going deep. What I love about some of the stuff that we do is even if it's a 5-hour program, like we're coming back and we're doing reinforcing things, we call them boosters, where we get to do activities where we get to give ownership even more of students so that they can decide like, what is the path that we want to take? Where do we want to take this program? Where do we want to lift our voices and really impact our peers around this? And so I think in deeper with violence prevention that is evidence-based.
Well, we thank both of you and for Dr. Shapiro as well for joining us today. If you have not read the 3-part series that Terry, as well as Cam Knight and Ann Saker put together, the links are right there in the comment section. So please read those. And in addition to the reporting, which is, again, looking through a database is not the sexy kind of journalism, right? But it is so important and it's so interesting what was found. So not only are the links there, but also just a treasure trove of information on this subject. So we thank both of you and Dr. Shapiro for joining us today. Terry, thank you for your work on the series, and we look forward to hearing more.
Thank you so much.
Terry, I apologize. I had you muted. Go ahead.
Thank you for having us.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. All right. Thank you guys so much. We appreciate it. And so once again, thank you to Terry DeMio, to Dr. Robert Shapiro, and Lori Droege as well. And again, all that information right there in the comment section for you. We thank you for being here and discussing the behind the scenes of Beyond the Bruises and where we go from here. Thanks again. I'm Catherine Nero, and I appreciate you joining us. Have a great rest of your day.